Welcome to Real Estate Success, a podcast about all things real estate. Hosted by Brian Patton, a local real estate expert, investor, and author. Get information on dealing with land, investment property, and commercial buildings so that you too can experience success in real estate. Now, here's the show.
Hello and welcome to the Real Estate Success Show with Brian Patton. I'm here today with Dan Merkel of Alpharetta City Council and Benita Dodd with the Georgia Public Policy Foundation. We're here to talk about two important bills that are floating around the Georgia State Assembly right now that really affect local zoning and zoning uses, zoning rights that are allowed by the local cities and counties. And one reason this is important to me is, some of you know, I was the zoning administrator in Alpharetta for 10 years, planning director in Lilburn for a couple of years, and now do a commercial real estate. So I see both sides of these issues a lot, how they affect development, how they affect homeowners. So when I saw this come across my desk a week or so ago, I thought, this is a subject I really want to cover on one of our podcasts. So we're here today with two folks that have some interesting views on it. So I'd like to introduce them. Dan Merkel, welcome.
Thank you.
Dan is, as I mentioned, Alpharetta City Council member, also former Alpharetta Chamber president. And what do you do full time for a living?
I'm an insurance agent specializing in business insurance.
Okay. Anything else you've done that I didn't cover you want to throw in there?
We don't have time for that list. I've been real involved in the community here in Alpharetta for the past 25 years. Mm-hmm. Yeah, just about you name it, we've been in it. So.
Okay. Well, welcome.
Thank
you.
And
Benita Dodd, who is Vice President of the Georgia Public Policy Foundation. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, thank you for having me. I am originally from South Africa. I like to tell folks that the foundation was looking for somebody from the South and they forgot where to stop looking. We are a state-focused free market think tank, limited government, lower taxes, individual initiative, and personal responsibility. My background is in journalism. I have a degree in journalism and communications, and I graduated in South Africa. I spent about 15 years at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, resigning when I was on the editorial board to move over to the Georgia Public Policy Foundation and head up their communications and environmental initiative, which includes land use, transportation, energy, air quality, water, things like that. Mm-hmm. It's been an interesting 16 years now at the foundation. So,
well, thank y'all both for joining us. You both are very active in your communities and know a lot about these two subjects we're going to talk about. So let's, number one, talk about, I guess, House Bill 302, which is also called State Senate Bill 172. It affects, I won't read you the whole bill, but I do want to read a little bit about it so we make sure we're all on the same page of what it does and doesn't cover. So that it affects zoning regulations regarding one and two family dwellings. So one family dwelling is probably what you live in, a single family attached or detached house, or attached, I'm assuming, and a two family dwelling, which is typically like a duplex. So it doesn't cover everything, just those two categories. And inside that new bill, it restricts the local municipalities from regulating building design elements. And those are listed here, and I'll just read them real quickly. Exterior building color, type or style of exterior cladding material. So that means, whether it's brick, stone, stucco, that sort of thing. Style of materials or roof structures or porches, exterior non-structural architectural ornamentation, location or architectural styling, windows and doors, including garage doors, the numbers and types of rooms, the interior layout of rooms, and types of foundation structures approved under state minimum standard codes. There's also some legalese as far as if it's required by building code, then obviously these cities and can continue, cities and municipalities can continue to regulate that. Am I missing anything in this new bill? I don't think so. I think everything else, that's pretty much what it's restricting, unless I'm missing something from either one of you.
No, you're not missing anything, but I would say that it's not necessarily a zoning issue. It's an aesthetics issue. Mm-hmm. All the zoning stands. It's the way I've read it, and I must make clear that we don't lobby at the Georgia Public Policy Foundation. So I have nothing pro or con about this piece of legislation. I talk about the policies behind it. And I think this is more about aesthetics that are quite arbitrary, quite frankly, than zoning requirements itself. It's nothing about public safety. It's nothing about environmental. It's just arbitrary.
Tell us where this stands. Now, we're recording today is Wednesday, February the, what is today? 27th. So where do we stand right now with the bill in the legislature?
It passed out of committee. It was a very close vote out of the House committee, and it is going into Senate committee tomorrow, Thursday.
Okay.
And then we'll see what happens. It's very close. I mean, obviously, a lot of people feel very strongly about their communities, and a lot of people also misunderstand the intentions of this legislation. It's not to give people carte blanche, I think, but I think there really are some very unreasonable requirements that local governments are putting on homes that unreasonably raise the cost of construction.
Now, Dan, I know the city council on Monday night of this week passed a resolution, which I have in my hands here. I assume it was unanimous. Was it unanimous vote?
It was.
Okay. So I guess it's a lot of whereases and wherefores and all the legal
Whatnots.
stuff. But basically, not in favor of this bill. Tell us from your stance and what you think the city council is saying here in this resolution.
Sure. Councilman John Hypes Monday night quoted one of our founding fathers talking about that the best governance is the governance that's closest to the people. And so to take local control away from Alpharetta or Cordele, Georgia, and put it in the hands of the state does exactly the opposite of that. It removes the opportunity for us to govern accordingly, because the conditions or situation in Cordele, Georgia certainly could be much different than here, just as what we have here is much different than they have there. So, the reality is, as a city, we have very little architectural control in place anyways when it comes to residential. Some of the few things that we do control is some of the aesthetics, which is no metal buildings. We don't allow metal buildings in residential. They limit the amount of stucco in certain situations, but majority of the regulation is self-policed by the developers around here. They know purple shutters don't sell. Once they put a neighborhood together and they put covenants in place, then it's up to the neighborhood to police based on their covenants, which it also controls aesthetics of the homes. But you have to take into consideration the effects on the other individuals in town. So if we were to hypothetically allow a double-wide metal trailer to be put on the corner next to several homes that are worth $500,000 apiece, you inadvertently affect the value of the neighboring properties in theory. Just as if you were to put the same product in the backyard or behind a subdivision of $300,000-$400,000 homes. Whatever that number is, I'm not here to argue that, but my point is if it adversely affects the surrounding neighbors, then we've got an issue, because that's the intent of government, to protect those people's rights just as much as somebody coming in.
So as a homeowner, I agree with some of those points. What do you think as a homeowner? What level of protection, Benita, should we be looking to our local governments?
As a homeowner in a homeowners association subdivision, unfortunately, because those are some of the biggest. I'm not going to use the word. It's been thrown around too much these days, but. Unfortunately, there are a lot of controls that I don't like in my own homeowners association. Mm-hmm. The kinds of things that we're talking about, being concerned about, is prohibiting a slab foundation, telling people they can't use vinyl windows. I don't want people to think that this is about the house next door that's painted pink with purple polka dots, or with purple shutters, or the metal house. This is about some really unreasonable architectural requirements that are being placed, and I believe deliberately, to price a certain level of home ownership out of communities. One of the more egregious examples of this is down in Bryan County, and by the way, Alpharetta does do a great job of allowing freedom of expression, so to speak, with home ownership and home construction. But as I was driving down to from East Cobb to here, I was looking at houses along the way, and so many of the houses would not be allowed to be built in so many communities. Bryan County, for some bizarre reason, requires that a front-facing house have 4 roof pitches.
Where is Bryan County?
It is down south, southeast Georgia. And there's so many others around the way. Which way your garage should face, how much garage should be part of your house, and whether your garage should have windows and things like this. These are not necessary for public safety. These are not necessary for environmental or historical protection. These are just simply ways to keep people at entry level home status from being able to purchase those homes. The $55,000 salary police officer who needs a $200,000 house to get a mortgage can't find a house that costs that much, and doubling the cost of the foundation, requiring a certain roof, requiring a certain siding for no reason other than aesthetic and not public safety or state building code. We have buku building codes that developers and builders and homeowners must meet. And this just, I'm really concerned that this is just pricing starter homes and entry-level homeowners out of the market.
One thing you did mention that I failed to mention was talking about historic preservation. The bill does exempt houses within, if I'm
Absolutely.
right, within the historic preservation district. So this does not affect a house that's either identified as historic or within historic districts of some sort. So
not even, and not even homes in homeowners in subdivisions where the home builder sets his standards.
Well, it would. Yeah, the home builder would have to set those standards,
yes.
But it would apply to that under the zoning decision by the local municipality, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So under this bill, the local municipality would not be able to affect those building design elements. It would be up to the developer to do that.
Yes.
So, okay.
Yes, and we must understand, of course, that developers build to the market. So if there's an opening in a certain level of purchase price, they're going to go to that level. They're not going to overbuild. They're not going to underbuild. They want to meet the market needs, basically. So,
I agree with that. But back to the historical, digging a little deeper. The only protected historical parts would have to meet the state historical standards, which we do not in Alpharetta. We have our city standards. There's always an argument, the difference between historic and old, not always the same thing. So
you're hash that out for me a little bit more. I'm not sure I understand. So you're saying it does not apply to
local, delegated, or identified historical properties. It has to be at the state level or federal.
So you're saying within the historic business district, without which Alpharetta has a small section in downtown, that that part would not be exempted under this bill?
No, because
really?
we are not. We don't qualify or have not applied for whatever whatever the difference is in those. I don't know the total details, but I do understand that wouldn't apply. But that I think we're getting into two different discussions here, and I'm starting to see it fall together. My concern is to this bill is the overstepping of the state coming to the municipalities. The county of Bryan County in Georgia has unreasonable issues. I would prefer to see some locals take legal action to straighten that out in Bryan County instead of taking the entire state of Georgia and putting us all because of the sins of another. In my former employment, we had a rather large office, 100-some employees, and there was 2 parking spaces designated for the real estate agents at the front door. And a certain employee was parking in that spot. And instead of addressing it with that employee, they sent out an email to 100-some people explaining the rules and why you shouldn't park in there. And we all kind of got chastised for the one, and we all knew who the one was, just go fix the one. Mm-hmm. So my point is that if we have issues around the state, I understand this came out of a situation which I believe was SR Homes over in Oconee County, where they were upset that there was a slab situation, whether it was a protruding above ground slab, they didn't like the look of it, or whatever those issues are. I prefer the folks at SR Home file a suit in that municipality to prove the points that we're saying here today, that it's not a public safety issue, it's above and beyond, and handle it that way as opposed to going to the Capitol and saying, okay, they're having problems here, so let's change the recipe for the entire state. Therefore, where I don't have a problem, all of a sudden now I do, because I've lost control of what little control I have, which is things like fences. You know, people say, well, I should be able to put the kind of fence I want on there. Well, we had a lady here in town that used plywood for a fence, and the neighbor couldn't sell her house. You know, we had a fence ordinance. We were able to go out and enforce it, that you can't use that because you're inadvertently or directly affecting the value of the people around you. So those controls. And actually, in this city, what I've seen, and you mentioned it, Benita, the builders are going to use common sense. In Alpharetta, I think what I'm seeing now is they're backing off the $1 million houses. They found the peak. They've hit that peak. They're back to the 700s. I think what they're starting to see now is that townhomes are going for $650 and $700, and people like me are saying, I want to trade my house for the same or more money for half the house to come into town. That's a lifestyle choice.
Yes.
I think when we talk about affordable housing, I don't think that the architectural control is changing the value of the houses that drastically. It's the cost of the land that is determining what houses are being built, what size. I talked to a developer recently who likes to say this is what the millennials want. Mm-hmm. And I questioned him. I said, is it what they want, or is it what you're building and telling them they can have?
That's very true.
So, and again, that goes back to the cost of the land. I can't tell you how many meetings I sit in with developers and builders that tell me this plan that they put in front of me is the only plan that works based on the cost of the land. Now, I've learned to only half believe that because I've had the wool pulled over my eyes a few times in those situations, but it really is the reality. So there's a pocket in my neighborhood of 180 homes here in Alpharetta that's undeveloped. I think I'm on the 4th or 5th rendition of somebody's idea of what to put in there. And the best one yet just pulled off the table because to fit into kind of the half-acre neighborhood that we are, they were only going to be able to do 9 homes plus a retention pond. Mm-hmm. And they wanted to get rid of the retention pond and do something creative, which every lot would have a little feature to handle the runoff. That just didn't work. The controls weren't there. They went back to the seller and said, it's not going to work. We need to reduce the price so we can do 9 homes. And the seller said no. So they pulled it off the table. We've got 4 acres of woods that will continue to be in our neighborhood for a while until somebody figures it out. But it is going to change. And I think the free market will change that. And the other thing, too, with the local control is the local ability to make exceptions. You know, there are situations that we can step in and go, you know, common sense is going to rule here. If you put it in the hands of the state, we're no longer managing it. So is the state equipped to have inspectors for, what do we got in the state of Georgia, 150 cities, something like that? All of a sudden, there's probably no control because the cost to man the enforcement for the entire state of Georgia would just be crazy.
Well, that's really interesting because basically the enforcement is already in place. All the kinds of codes that we do need are in place, and the building codes, the environmental codes, historical preservation. You say you don't have any historical preservation protection, and that's because you haven't applied for it at the state level, is my understanding. If you had, you would have that. Now, I don't know whether you feel that you don't need that, but basically, where you and I differ, I think, is that you believe that the best local control is local government, and I believe that the best local control is that private property owner.
I'm not 100% on the opposite side. I can assure you that. As a property owner myself, I do understand that. And I was probably more on that side of thinking before I got into office, and have spent as much time as I have in the community and community development, economic development, all those areas where you get to see the true effects of what happens to other people's property when something like this happens. So it is a fine line. I don't think it's a black and a white. I think we already know it's a gray area because there are certain things that are controlled locally. Some stuff's controlled, as you said, the building codes per the state, and we're in a position where we need to enforce those. Mm-hmm. There are federal regulations, so there's always going to be these layers. I'm very much in favor of limiting the layers, mm-hmm. But not to the point where local control, which is as simple as this, because again, we're different than Bryan County, we're different than Oconee County, mm-hmm. we're different than Cordele. That one doesn't fit all, which would be this proposal with the state stepping in and saying, none of you can control this. Because I've got a different issue. One of my biggest issues here in the city is the number of people lined up at the door wanting to come in and build and go, and trying to control that. And we've seen, because of that massive growth that this city has experienced, we're into issues of parking in townhome complexes. Mm-hmm. We were using the state recommended number of parking spaces per unit, and one or two got built before we really caught on that if you went over there on a Saturday morning, you couldn't drive through there, because human nature is they're downsizing, they're putting stuff in the garage they haven't thought about what they're going to do with yet, they're parking in the driveway. The driveways are 9 feet long, which means they're blocking the sidewalk. They're parking on the street, so anybody going in there has got to back out. We didn't contemplate those things. And so we went ahead and changed our ordinance, and we changed our parking to, some people might say it's a little ridiculous. We've got a complex right down the street here that's only got 10 of the 40 townhomes built. Mm-hmm. On any given evening when I drive home from city council meeting at 10:30, 11 o'clock at night, there's 10 to 15 cars in the overflow lot. That's with 10 units. Now, when the other 30 get built, is that math going to continue? And if it does, I've got a big problem, because there's not enough parking on that site, and they will take up majority of what is available for public parking in that vicinity. We have people in another complex similar that park their car across the street at City Hall in the parking deck. So those are the things that we learn as we go, and those are the things that we make changes to address at the local level.
And that is a public safety issue, and nobody would argue that you couldn't do that.
Well, it's a public safety issue, yes. It's also an issue where I'm one of the first few people to buy a townhome in there. The complex gets finished, all 40 units are sold, the developer's gone, the builders are gone, they don't even live here. And now I've got 40 units with a parking mess, and all of a sudden I get transferred and I've got to sell my unit, and the value of my unit is drastically reduced because everybody who comes to look at it says, where are we going to park? Now,
of course, you do know that I'm sure that the townhome has a homeowners association unit, a homeowners association that should be enforcing those regulations too. So even in that case, it would not be the business of local government to enforce that.
No, but it would be the business of local government to see that as a problem and act on that so that future developments don't inherit the same problem. Because it is my problem now. It's not just public safety. It is the parking spaces that we designated for people to use the trailhead of our trail system, that we put 12 parking spaces on the street to accommodate that use, is now being used up by the residents in there.
So is this, I heard somebody mention earlier affordable housing, and it feels like we're tiptoeing around that issue a little bit. Is this an affordable housing issue, or is it something else?
Me first?
Sure.
Ladies first.
Well, there's a big difference between affordable housing and housing affordability. So here's what happens when you raise the price of homes and then you mandate that builders come in and do affordable housing. The builders have to make up that loss somewhere. So what they do is they raise the cost of the rest of the houses, the other 80%, to cover that mandate that they have for, say, 20% housing. But what happens is you have affordable housing, and then the people in the neighboring market, in the surrounding market, look at the higher prices on those higher priced houses, and they say, well, if these developers can get that price, then I'm going to raise mine when I sell mine. And that's where housing affordability is impacted. Affordable housing can impact the larger area of housing affordability for everybody. So I don't know if you agree with my definition there.
Well, it's a topic. It's a great definition. It's a topic we talk about in the city and have been for quite some time. Affordable housing fails to get a good definition sometimes. So we've traditionally used workforce housing. Mm-hmm. So in our studies, when I first was elected 3 years ago, we did some studies and we talked about what does workforce housing look like, and they used this scenario of the fireman and the school teacher.
Yes.
So between them, they're making $100,000, and that's really the lower end these days of what they're getting paid coming out of training. So even using that $100,000, then if you look at I forget who it was. Federal guidelines, whatever, the 28% of your income typically is
28
used
to
toward
31, yeah.
20 to 31. So I just did some quick math on that before I left. That's $2,200 a month in a payment. On $100,000, a little bit more than that. They say that's a $400,000 house. I still think that's a stretch, but let's even call it $300,000. So now we've seen the price range, and then we go back to what I was saying earlier. What's being built, and what can you get for $300,000? The reality is, in this town, there is a lot of that here. People don't understand that there are several pockets of this city that are just older neighborhoods. They're the 1970s and 1980s. They're split level, 3-bedroom, 2-bath. So we go back to defining what is that.
And you can buy those in the $250 to $270 range right now all day long.
You can, and put some money into them, fix them up, whatever. What is it? Is it an entitlement that everybody should have 3-bedroom, 3-bath, finished basement, big yard for the dog and the fence? So I don't want to get into that discussion completely, but it is a reality. And, what does that look like? So when people were clamoring that we're not building enough of it, the free market's going to determine that. And I was in a regional leadership institute a couple of years ago where this topic came up. And somebody said, well, we should mandate that every subdivision built in Georgia should require 20% of it to be affordable housing. I know a lot of builders. I know a lot of real estate people up here. They're not going to do it. They flat out won't do it, at least in an urban environment. The reality is, two things. One, if you were to do, again, let's use the 40 homes and 10%, 4 of those are going to be $200,000 and the other 36 are going to be $400,000. The $200,000 guy is going to be in there as long as he has to be before he can turn around and flip it. Mm-hmm. And the value of that's going way up because of the value of the neighbors. You know, the old saying, be the cheapest in the neighborhood. And the builder's going to struggle to sell the $400,000 houses if they're mingled in with the other 200. And it's some of it's economics, some of it's lifestyle. People live with in areas around people that they identify with and want to be around. Most of these neighborhoods up here, you'll find out, are swim and tennis. That's the old type of model that was built for many years. So they're very social oriented. When you start getting into mandating things, builders have told me we won't build. So to me, it's two different issues. I don't think what we're talking about on the front end here is mandating that these houses become too expensive because we're talking about the color of the paint or which way the garage faces, or our folks down in Bryan County need to get their stuff figured out. But I think the best control is the closest to the people.
Well, I'd like to move to another a bill that's in the Georgia Assembly right now, which I think it's called a small cell. It's a 5G allowing cell, and I don't know as much about this bill as I do about the HB 302, but I have talked to my state representative about it to get some insight, and it appears, and I know you guys probably know a lot more about it than I do. So somebody give me a synopsis of where that bill is and what it covers, if you don't mind.
You go for that one because you've seen it most recently. The last time I saw it was at the end of the year when it was still a discussion issue.
Okay. Yeah, and it's my understanding from an email this morning, it's moving pretty fast.
And what does it allow? What is it? It's taking government, local control from location of cell towers within the right of way. Is that correct?
That's part of it, Brian. So
Okay.
basically what it is that the state is negotiating with the telecommunication companies for a statewide deal. And in that statewide deal, they're giving them permission to use right-of-ways that may not be controlled by the state. And with that, they can come in.
That doesn't even sound legal. Am I missing something?
A bunch of lawyers put it together.
So Alpharetta controls a city right of way. You're saying that the state can come in and allow that right of way to be used however the state wants to
within the guidelines that were negotiated. So obviously a lot of the language says that it will not interfere with the current use of the pole. So if I've got a street light on Haynesbridge Road and it fits in line with the line that they're trying to draw with these different boxes, they have permission to use that, and they can even adapt it if they need to add another 30 feet in height to it to get to the necessary usage of that particular thing. Now, they're claiming that in return for that, I should be willing to give that up, but in return, I'm going to get paid as a city a fee by the telecommunication companies, which will generate a revenue stream to the city for our quote-unquote use or inconvenience. When we've already got an ordinance in place that we worked on real hard last year, a local ordinance, which will allow us to work with the different telecommunication companies to get 5G in the city with some local control, which can be done so that we don't have the aesthetic issues that are not addressed as much in this state Senate bill.
Now, the way I understand 5G technology is that the old technology is big, tall cell towers. Now, apparently the need for those are going away, and the 5G network is a more localized type. And from what I was reading, it seems like those poles need to be, is it 50 to 100 feet from each other, away from each other?
I think it's about 300 feet from each other.
Okay, so around 300 feet, which is roughly, say, if you're in a neighborhood, a lot of times your lot is 80 to 100 feet wide in the suburbs. So potentially we're talking, every 3 houses, that's where the poles could be. Now, we talked earlier, I don't know if Daniel wants to get a shot of that cabinet, but you were saying a typical 5G cabinet is somewhere around the size of that filing cabinet right there.
It's about the size of your standard kitchen refrigerator.
Okay, all right, that's a good visual for us to have.
And
so that would typically go on top of a pole or bottom of a pole.
Yes,
okay,
depending on the line, the way it's set up, and good point. Every 300 feet, which is a football field, if there's not a pole there, you got to put one there.
Now, are they required to co-locate? In other words, if there's an existing telephone pole, do they have to put it on there, or could they put a pole right beside it with this new box on it?
I think the word might be endeavor.
Endeavor.
To use what's there.
Endeavor.
Yeah,
okay.
and
so that's a little bit loose.
And they may have changed it. I pointed that out early on. Being in the insurance business, we see that word quite often, unfortunately. And I honestly, I really think that the telecommunications companies would do their best to use what's out there. It costs them that much more money to add a pole. So, and they have identified the poles in the city. We went through this study when we did our local ordinance to see where there would be gaps. And so we've identified it, and there aren't that many. I mean, I think it's 75 poles. I may be way off, but that's the number that keeps sticking in my head. Might be needed to add. Might need added to the city
the entire city.
to cover the city. and then use what's already there on the rest of them.
Well, the really interesting thing about this whole discussion is that technology has changed so much in just the past decade. Mm-hmm. And I know you mentioned that some of the extreme boxes, the size of a standard refrigerator, those things are going to shrink. I mean, if you just remember the movie Wall Street and what cell phones looked like then and what they look like now, smartphones, doing everything. My concern is different from yours in that I don't believe that there should be a statewide standard when so many technologies are being developed right now. And when we talked about this last year, it was, why can't local government and utilities get together and hash this out before the state has to do anything? But we're listening to people in the rural areas saying, we want to be able to watch Netflix. And we want you to pay for it, by the way, which is a whole nother issue. But I am really concerned in this case that the state setting a standard is going to interfere with technological innovation and advances. So I don't know what the answer is. I think that in this case, with local right-of-way, there should be some kind of agreement with local government, but I also think that these small cell towers are definitely not the end all of the discussion.
Well, that's a great point too, and we discussed this. So let's just say this passes and they come in and they hang these refrigerator-sized boxes on these poles, and technology changes, and all of a sudden the need for that box is shrunk down to the size of a cooler. And they abandon those large ones, leave them hanging on the poles because it costs more money to bring them down and get rid of them than it does just to leave them. And then what access does the city have? What responsibilities? So those are the other issues that come in there. And I agree with you again. For them to deem the entire state needs to be ruled when local control can't have as good. And if you looked at our ordinance, it's really well. We spent a lot of money, a lot of time, and professionals coming in saying, okay, we want 5G in the city. I mean, technology is what put Alpharetta on the map. When they came in back when they did Windward, and the fiber optics were put here. That's why we've got almost a little over 700 as of last month, I guess, technology firms in the Alpharetta area.
Technology City of the South.
Technology City of the South. That's correct. So we are on the forefront. We do want 5G. Our commercial residents want 5G. The residents want 5G. So we want to do it too, but we want to have some control so that 300 feet doesn't mean a pole in my front yard.
Okay. Well, I guess we're sort of on the same sides of that issue,
although
for different reasons. So I really appreciate you guys being here today. We can close out by each one of you giving how folks can get in touch with you if they want to talk more about this issue or other issues that you're involved in. Go ahead, Benita.
My name is Benita Dodd, and that is my email as well, benitadodd@georgiapolicy.org. But for anybody who doesn't know how to spell Benita, just send me an email at info@georgiapolicy.org, and I'm happy to respond and talk to anybody about our issues.
Great, thank you.
Awesome. Yes, Dan Merkel. Email address is dmerkel@Alpharetta. That's alpharetta.go.us.
All right. Well, I appreciate you joining us today. Get involved in local politics, state politics. It's very important. It affects your life. It affects everyone's life around you. This has been the Real Estate Success Show with Brian Patton. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Real Estate Success Podcast. Be sure to subscribe and review to get new shows delivered straight to your feed. If you'd like to learn more about a subject we haven't covered, or just want to talk to Brian, email him at bp@brianpattoncommercial.com. Thanks for tuning in.